I'm happy to be joined today by former Defence Secretary and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Michael Portillo. Mr. Portillo, thanks for joining us today. The economy is in a pretty bad way at the moment. Do you ever wish that you were still an MP so you could perhaps be able to do something about it?
I don't want to be an MP because my political career is behind me. But actually, I wouldn't mind wrestling with this situation. I think actually politicians very much like a challenge. People have said, poor old Obama taking over at such a difficult time. Or they might say, poor old Cameron if he takes over next year. On the whole, I don't think that's the way politicians look at it. They rather like taking over in difficult situations because they think they can make a difference. And also, it enables them perhaps to put forward more radical solutions because people realise that urgent action needs to be taken.
We've had a cyclical economy in this country for centuries. Do you think this recession was just inevitable?
I think the cycle could have played out differently. The recession could have been less severe. Of course, there are cycles, and cycles are necessary. Actually, going into a downturn, I think, is an important phase of the growth of any economy, because what happens is weaker industries go to the wall, new businesses have the opportunity to be created, the economy moves forward. But you want the peaks to be relatively small, and you want the troughs to be relatively small. And in fact, I think government policy on both sides of the Atlantic has meant that this recession has been very severe, because not only were people borrowing too heavily, but governments were borrowing too heavily. We got ourselves into the idea, quoting Gordon Brown, that we'd abolish boom and bust. Now, that was absurd. We had not abolished cycles. We shouldn't ever have thought that we did. And so, yes, it was inevitable, but it needn't have been this deep.
You've talked previously about the country being in a phony recession. Does that mean that the UK's got a big hit to the economy coming next year?
Well, let me explain what I mean. We've already had tough times, and there are, lots of people have lost their jobs, and lots of businesses have been hit, manufacturing and retail businesses. But what I mean is that has happened in a context in which many people actually were better off than they were the year before. Why? Because they got pay increases that had been built on inflationary expectations. Inflation turned out to be very much lower. Mortgage interest rates, of course, collapsed, so that people have had more money in their pockets. Now, they've not been spending that money, many of them, because they've been anxious. Now, if you look at the year ahead, lots of people obviously will be less well off than they are now. We know that taxes are going to go up in April, and it's a fair prediction that there'll be another budget in July with a new government, and that taxes will go up again. So it's for those reasons that I think that many people will feel poorer. Now, the other thing that worries me is that the government hasn't yet, by any means, sorted out the deficit. We got into this problem by borrowing too much and saving too little. And we are now addressing this problem by still saving too little and borrowing yet more. The government has borrowed enormously. And the answer to the problem can't be the same as the problem itself. And so we haven't obviously yet taken whatever measures need to be taken to put right the public finances. And we're in a vulnerable position. Until it's clear that a government is going to determinedly put right the public finances, then we have to doubt whether it's going to be able to fund its deficits successfully.
We're now in the worst recession since the Second World War. How worried are you about the long-term damage this is going to do to the UK economy?
Well, I think it can be put right, but it will be difficult so to do. I mean, there's an unfortunate coincidence at the moment that we, as a government, are trying to borrow 13% of GDP, and the United States is trying to do the same. Now, that's an awful lot of trillions of dollars that are trying to be sold to people willing to buy government paper at one time. You have to ask yourself whether there's an endless supply of people willing to buy government debt. You have to ask whether in the United Kingdom at the moment, some of that funding of government debt is being supplied by the so-called quantitative easing, £200 billion pumped into the economy by the government. So, that may be masking the extent of some of our problems. From what I remember of the 1980s, when we had a very big public finance problem, if you deal with it determinedly, you go through a rough period, but then you can be surprised at how quickly the economy can rebuild itself. Governments always underestimate, when they go into a recession, how massively the tax receipts disappear. Sometimes they also underestimate that as you come out of the recession and businesses start growing again, that, of course, the tax receipts shoot up again.
At one stage, you were in the running to lead the Conservative Party. Do you think that you would have made a better leader than David Cameron?
No, undoubtedly not. It's all quite a long time ago. I mean, I was his sort of John the Baptist in a way, because what I wanted to do with the Conservative Party in 2001 is what he's been doing with the Conservative Party from 2005. In other words, moving it to the centre, trying to wean it away from its obsession with the European question, get it onto the kind of bread and butter issues of education and health and the environment. And the reason that he's far ahead in the opinion polls is basically because he has executed that strategy. He's changed the Conservative Party from looking like a kind of fringe extremist party to one that sits in the middle ground of politics.
You've made television programmes on a wide variety of issues, cultural programmes, documentaries. You even swapped lives with a single mum. The new series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here has just started. You enjoyed life in the political jungle. I just wondered whether you would ever consider going into the Australian jungle.
No, the stuff that I do on television, I control, and I don't want to be in a situation where I'm controlled by somebody else. So I will make my own documentaries and make my own setups.
So you don't fancy 4 weeks in the jungle with Katie Price then?
I do not.